Welcome back to part 2 of my biblical perspective on missiology, I pray. Last time we were discussing the idea that it was part of the biblical author's worldview framework and their biblical conception, and therefore part of the inspired word of God, that at the Tower of Babel, it wasn't just a confusion of languages and dispersing of peoples, but that the Lord entrusted the nations of the earth, with the exception of Abraham and Sarah and their descendants, to these characters called the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, created spiritual beings who were appointed to have authority over the nations, and that the Lord kind of distances himself for the time being, temporarily, from the nations of the earth, and promises that Abraham will be a conduit through which Yahweh will again bless all the nations of the earth. And so we have now come to a checkpoint as we approach Psalm 82, the chapter on which the whole drama of the nations sort of pivots and takes a turn toward looking ahead to the Messiah, what's wrong and what the solution's going to be. So hopefully this time I will stop looking at my face bubble over here. It's just the only human face, and so it's natural to want to interact with it. Otherwise, I'm just looking at a computer camera, but I'll get used to it. Let's do this. Psalm 82 begins like this. God, Elohim, has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, he holds judgment. Okay, so first thing to talk about, what's the divine council? The divine council is this conception of essentially it's an image of God in the heavens, basically having a meeting, a staff meeting with, I'm already looking at my face over here, gracious, a staff meeting with his angels, well, higher ranked than angels, with his B'nai Elohim, who he uses, who he has aiding him in his administration of justice and of his rule over the nations, his sovereignty over the nations. Imagine a king and his court of governors, or I guess from a European terminology, dukes and duchesses and so on. It's not quite it, but the divine council. Let's just, instead of having me ramble about it, look at a different psalm that also depicts a divine council scene. This is from Psalm 89, 5-7. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Yahweh, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. Holy ones is another term that the Old Testament uses often for created spiritual beings. For who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? That kind of clues us in that he's not talking about Israelites as holy ones, because no Israelites are in the skies, in the heavens. Who in the skies can be compared to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings? The B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. There they are again. Who among the heavenly beings, who among the sons of God is like Yahweh, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him? You see, it's typical for modern Western Christians to think of the lowercase g gods as all fake, as figments of imagination. But it might help just to think of them as like angels, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. We all believe that there's other created spiritual beings, angels and demons. Well, the B'nai Elohim, or the lesser g, the lowercase g Elohim, are like the angels in that they're created spiritual beings. They're just outrank angels. Angels are messengers. It's a little lower rank job in many cases, but a messenger, one sent by Yahweh. And so the B'nai Elohim are like the angels, created spiritual beings, and they gather with Yahweh. They gather in a council in order to meet with Yahweh about the administration of the nations. You actually see divine council scenes in the beginning of Job, when the Lord gathers with the divine council, and this character, the Hasatan, comes in after walking the earth, and says, accuses Job of only loving and being faithful to Yahweh because of the benefits. So there's a divine council scene where you can look at and you can see God meeting with these other divine beings, spiritual beings in the heavenly realm. And another one comes from 2 Kings something. I should have this for you. I'm going to pause and give it to you. Okay, we're back recording again. I looked it up. This is in 1 Kings 22. It's one of the clearest depictions of a divine council scene we have in the Bible. And it happens when Ahab has summoned Micaiah, one of the few remaining prophets of the Lord, to come and inquire to him whether the Lord would say he should go and do battle. And so here we are in verse 15. When he had come to the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain? And he answered him, Go up in triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. But the king said to him, How many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh? And he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains, as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, These have no master. Let each return to his home in peace. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil? And Micaiah said, Therefore hear the word of the Lord. Here's the divine council scene. Sorry for all the prelude. Hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? So the Lord has decreed what's going to happen. He has a goal. Ahab's going to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead. And he puts it before his divine council and says, all right, so how are we going to make it happen? Not that the Lord doesn't know, but much like he wants to partner with humans, with Adam and Eve to multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. He could do it all himself, but he wants to partner with us to image him. And so likewise, he has created spiritual beings who he wants to take part and partner with him in his governance. Anyway, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, By what means? And he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, You are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you. All right, so there is another example of the divine council showing up in the scriptures. And a fascinating example at that. The Lord is sovereign and decides what will happen in his rule of the earth, but he partners with humans and with B'nai Elohim, with divine beings, in order to bring his decrees to pass, and involves them even in some of the decision making, but it ultimately belongs to him. So Yahweh is not utterly alone in the heavens, but he is awesome above all who are around him. He is unequaled. He is the creator God. He created all the lesser beings. So back to Psalm 82. Psalm 82, we just had verse 1 so far. It opens on God in the midst of the gods in the divine council. And he rises to make a judgment. He says, How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. And then in the next verse, the psalmist makes a little commentary, and he says, They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All of the foundations of the earth are shaken. And we'll see soon in the prophets a return to this shaking of the earth, but it seems clear enough to me that the psalmist's comment is about the sons of God. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They are not judging justly. They are not giving justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintaining the right of the afflicted and the destitute. They're not rescuing the weak and the needy. They are judging unjustly and showing partiality to the wicked. So then the Lord renders a sentence of judgment upon the sons of God and the divine council. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. There are some people who think that these lowercase g gods are, they put them in square, actually the NIV puts it in scare quotes, as if the gods aren't real. People will argue that these are judges of Israel, but at what point were judges of Israel put over the nations? A. At what point, and how would it be a revelation or a sentence to say to them, like men you shall die, if in fact they're already men? But no, these are the B'nai Elohim. Elohim renders judgment among the Elohim. These are divine beings who God has put over the nations. We'll see evidence in the final verse in a minute that these are in fact those who were put over the nations. And God tells them, you may be spiritual beings, by nature undying, immortal, but nevertheless, like men you will die. You will fall like any prince. He gives a death sentence to immortal spiritual beings. And then the psalmist concludes the psalm by saying, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. The result of this judgment on the members of God's divine council is that God will inherit all the nations. Think back to our Deuteronomy 32 passage. He allotted the nations according to the number of sons of God, but as their inheritance. He gave the nations their inheritance according to the number of sons of God, but Jacob was his allotted portion, his heritage, his inheritance. So here the psalmist is calling on God to judge the nations, to judge the stars, the sons of God who he has appointed over the nations, who have been unjust in their governance, and to re-inherit, to gather back the nations to himself. So this idea of the re-inheritance of the nations actually becomes part of the whole complex of ideas of what the Messiah will accomplish, what the anointed one of Yahweh, who will be sent to set things right in the world and in creation, what he will do. One of the things he will do is judge the nations, judge the sons of God over the nations, and re-inherit the nations for Yahweh. Let's see that. First, I think it's in Isaiah. Yes, Isaiah 24. On that day, that being the Lord's day, the day of judgment, on that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of the earth on earth. Then the moon will be confounded and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. This draws on a lot of the things that we've already seen so far. A, the host of heaven. We saw them in two passages in Deuteronomy as those, the sun, moon, stars, and the host of heaven who were allotted to the other nations that they may bow down to them and worship them. But you, Israel, don't bow down to them and worship them. They weren't allotted to you. The Lord will punish the host of heaven, the spiritual beings, the divine beings over the nations, and the kings of the earth, their earthly counterparts. And the sun and the moon are astral imagery for created spiritual beings. The sun and the moon will be confounded and ashamed. For the Lord, Yahweh, reigns on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, his portion, his allotted inheritance. And Haggai puts the same idea this way. For thus says Yahweh of hosts, I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says Yahweh of hosts. I am about to shake the heavens and the earth and to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. The shaking, remember in Psalm 82 just now, all the foundations of the earth are shaken. The shaking of the earth is the overturning of kingdoms, the overthrow of the throne of kingdoms. And it's going to be a parallel judgment of the heavens and the earth, of the rebels in the spiritual realm and the rebels in the earthly realm. God's going to shake and overthrow them both. You know, the Hillel ben Shachar, the day star, son of the dawn, the divine enemy, Satan of Isaiah 14. He wants to raise up his throne on the Mount of Assembly, and take God's place in the divine council. But he and all rebels will have their throne overthrown when God shakes the heavens and the earth, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in. I'd argue, I mainly see this as the peoples of the nations who will believe in the Messiah, who will turn to Yahweh and put their faith, their allegiance, their loyalty, and their trust in him. So all this is supposed to happen at the day of judgment. And like I said, it gets wrapped up in the complex of ideas around the coming Messiah. For example, in Psalm 2, the Lord says of the Anointed One, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill." And the Messiah, the king figure, the king character, says, "I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession." Yahweh, who took for his inheritance the people of Israel, says to the Messiah, "Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage." Even all those who were allotted, given their inheritance according to the number of sons of God, I will make the ends of the earth your possession. And then there's the scene in Daniel from which Jesus takes his favorite appellation, his favorite nickname, the Son of Man. It also continues to harp on and cast light on this same theme of the Messiah being the conduit through which, he's the one who descended from Abraham, through whom Yahweh would bless all nations. The Yahweh becomes the conduit for all the nations being restored again to Yahweh. He's taking them back to himself, not the way they were when they were disinherited at Babel, but renewed somehow, redeemed and freed from corruption of sin and the injustice and violence that came after the fall and after the Genesis 6 episode and Genesis 11 and the disinheritance. Anyway, this in Daniel, here's what happens. Here's the passage where Jesus took his favorite name, Son of Man. "Behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." This Son of Man is going to be presented by the Ancient of Days, a dominion and a kingdom over all nations, all peoples, all languages. That certainly harkens back to the Babel episode. That they should serve him, and it's going to be everlasting. It will not be destroyed. There's this juxtaposition now between the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, who have rebelled and who have been unfaithful with their responsibility, their stewardship of the nations, and this new character coming on the scene, the Son of Man. What is that supposed to mean? The Son of Man, who is given the responsibility and given the authority that had belonged to the sons of God. It's taken from them and is going to be given to this Son of Man figure coming on the clouds. And when Jesus is on trial, he tells, I'm not going to have it right, I guess it's the Jewish council who's on trial, the Sanhedrin. He tells them, "You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds," and they just rip their clothes. It's not so obvious to us, but they know he's immediately talking about this Daniel 7 passage, and he's saying, "Look, I might not look like it now, but I'm the one who's going to inherit an everlasting kingdom of all nations, tribes, and tongues." And they just tear their clothes. It's blasphemy. How could he have said it any clearer? Jesus claims to be this Messiah, and obviously it's insane because he is a hick from bum cuss nowhere Nazareth, who should know better than claiming to be the one coming and being presented by this Ancient of Days with the nations. So I think this is our next checkpoint before the coming of the Messiah onto the scene next time. Obviously, it makes perfect sense with these passages and this idea of the Messiah coming to take back dominion over the nations from these rebels, both divine and human, it makes sense why the Jews expected a conquering king. But we'll talk about that next time. Checkpoint, part 3 on the way. Peace.